Welcome to War Room, the official podcast of the U.S. Army War College online journal, graciously supported by the Army War College Foundation. Please join the conversation at warroom.armywarcollege.edu. We hope you enjoy the program.
Make sure not to miss a single podcast and subscribe to A Better Peace, the War Room podcast, at iTunes, Google Play, or your favorite subscription service. The views expressed in this presentation are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect those of the U.S. Army War College, U.S. Army, or Department of Defense.
Welcome to A Better Peace, the War Room podcast. I'm Colonel Tom Spahr, an assistant professor in the Department of Military Strategy, Planning, and Operations here at the U.S. Army War College. It's a pleasure to have you with us. On August 16th, 2021, the world watched as nearly 20 years after the U.S. invasion of Afghanistan, the Taliban marched triumphantly into Kabul while coalition forces hastily exited from the airport. Images of this event were broadcast around the world that reminded many eerily of the U.S. exit from Vietnam in 1975. Over 800,000 U.S. service members served in Afghanistan. 2,352 died and over 20,000 were wounded. This conflict dominated many military careers and left a mark on an entire generation of Americans. Here at the Army War College, we are committed to capturing some of the experiences and insights from those who participated in the war in Afghanistan, with hopes of informing future generations engaged in similar conflicts. I have the pleasure today of welcoming to the studio Maj Gen Brian Mennes, Deputy Commander of the XVIII Airborne Corps. Maj Gen Mennes is also a mentor of mine, who I've had the pleasure of serving with on 3 separate tours in Afghanistan. In July of 2021, General Mennes transitioned out of command of the 10th Mountain Division, where his division headquarters served as the core of the U.S. Forces Afghanistan and the Resolute Support Staff, and he personally served as the Deputy Chief of Staff for Operations in Kabul. This 2020 to 2021 tour was Maj Gen Mennes' 6th deployment to Afghanistan, spanning the length of the war. His previous positions included as Joint Special Operations Command, or JSOC, planner for the initial invasion of Afghanistan in 2001. He deployed again as a battalion commander in the 82nd Airborne Division, as a battalion commander of the 1st Ranger Battalion several times, and as a brigade commander of the 4th Brigade Combat Team, 82nd Airborne Division in 2012, where I had the pleasure of serving as his brigade intelligence officer. And then finally, as a division commander through the summer of 2021. He also deployed to Iraq 3 times along the way, so sir, you've been busy. Maj Gen Mennes is a true warrior scholar, and we are fortunate to have him on the podcast today. Sir, you and I served together in 2001 during the invasion, second during that difficult tour in 2012 when you were the brigade commander in Western Kandahar province, and then briefly as I was leaving and you were coming to the Resolute Support headquarters in Kabul during the summer of 2020. Today, I'd like to have a conversation and hear your thoughts on Afghanistan and what we can learn from this conflict and what you can share about military leadership in combat. So, sir, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, Tom, I really appreciate the introduction and, really grateful, one, for your service personally to our team and more importantly, to the dedication and service of so many who, threw their life literally into this endeavor. So really happy to be with you here today, Tom.
Great. Thanks, sir. So were you surprised when the Afghan army fell so quickly and the Taliban seized Kabul?
Yeah, and I, sort of regretted thinking you might ask that question. And, before I answer, as I said, we threw so much into it on so many levels. But no, I was not surprised. I was not surprised because of how much energy it took, from an external force to help determine what even security was in the towns and villages, across Afghanistan. I reflect to many analysis we got from the IC and others about really, who was in control of what area, where was peace and security, where was the reach of the government. And traditionally I'd see charts that I was pretty much aware of and agreed with that showed that we didn't really, we being us partnered with the DROA and ANSF, have a lot of control. And where we did have control was accompanied by, a lot of economic prosperity, let's say in Kandahar, the major metropolitan areas. But we didn't really have a lot of reach outside of those urban communities. And so watching that, I knew that with the lack of political support for really their security forces, or the security forces' inability to bond with communities, old community policing that we had sort of thought we would get after or try to support, it really, in my opinion, never took root. So it seemed to me, without our direct intervention, that the Taliban continued to have a dominance across the majority of Afghanistan, freedom of maneuver, ability to resupply themselves, a lot of military qualities that they really had a distinct advantage of, and interior lines, mass, qualities that we're all very familiar with as military leaders. And so, certainly then when, we departed and we weren't there to provide that support, it was not a surprise to me that, the military was not able to hold up for any length of time.
Yes, sir. So you mentioned that we struggled in those rural areas. Yeah, you and I, when we were in Western Kandahar, I felt like, we made progress, and we made progress on some of the tours. And I think back to that experience, and that was 2012, and doing counterinsurgency. But then it seemed like it unraveled years later. And we were there, even when we were there, we saw it, and we were frustrated with some incompetence and corrupt leaders, police brutality and corruption, and at times even our own government because of changing policies. So when you had to go back, sir, in spring of 2020 as a division commander, did you feel that there was still hope for the government of Afghanistan?
I did not, in its current form. I didn't see, certainly reflecting on my experience there in Afghanistan, personally, during my battalion command tour with the Great One Fury team, I had the opportunity to serve General McNeil as his theater tactical force commander. And in that capacity, with the surge going on 15 months, I lived a large majority of those months out in villages. And that was villages across the country, as far north as Nuristan, Nangarhar, all around Kabul, and in the south, Helmand. So we had this remarkable opportunity to meet a lot of Afghans. And across the board, I found that their desires for government were not congruent with what Giro was going to provide. And so also having read a lot about the Afghans, one book I read early was called My Life with the Taliban by Abu Saif, who described a movement of the Taliban that was really put in place to take off the chains that were imposed by the Mujahideen warriors that we had sort of supported during, the Russian war. And so in 88 and 89, they come in power. And as you know, those people corrupted what was the local form of government. So the traditional tax base paid to a malik, where justice was imposed, was disrupted. And so the Taliban back in those days wanted to take back a government and create a government for the people, by the people. And frankly, to me, it was very appealing reading that. I'm not sure that if I was in Sangsar or Western Kandahar in those days, I wouldn't have joined up with them, frankly. Now, their absolute power corrupted absolutely. They got in bed with the, nefarious actors and created a government that was sort of not recognizable by Western people and certainly too extreme. So certainly that wasn't good for the people of Afghanistan. But all in all, I didn't think that Giroa offered a lot of opportunity for local governance. The Maliks did not have an opportunity to, decide for themselves, how to deal with the resources and constraints, etc. And so I did not think that the government was going to last without significant change to the Taliban movement, meaning we'd have to almost annihilate it or exhaust it to the point where that government could flourish on its own right. So the government of Afghanistan's constitution formed in the Bonn, I think, should have been reevaluated. I don't think that's different from when America came together, that little experiment in 76. If I'm not mistaken, it took us 6, 7, 8 years to, move from an Article of Confederation to a constitution, which I think is natural with a burgeoning government. And so I just don't believe that we push to have the Afghan people, and leaders come together to reassess how they wanted to design their government. I think that was a fatal flaw, frankly.
Yes, sir. And even if that change had made, sir, do you think we would have needed a small U.S. footprint to persist there for
No,
some time?
I think you could have. I think the support that we could have provided, both militarily, security, governmental, I hate to say sort of normal governmental relations with, a constituents of other embassies in Kabul, certainly if accepted by the Taliban as a contributor to the health of a combined Afghanistan, I think would have definitely been something that could have been, entertained. Even as I watched the Taliban ourselves work against ISIS, you saw the Taliban sort of come together with Jaroa and us at certain occasions in parts of the campaign where we had a shared desire to keep external forces out of Afghanistan. So when I looked at that, I thought, well, jeepers, I think, there could have been a little bit more shared values than, pure differences. I don't think it was completely polar. With my communication to, both parties, limited as it may have been in some regards, I thought there was a lot more similarities than dissimilarities. Unfortunately, Jaroa, the people that were governing it, didn't benefit at all from change because they had everything to lose, right? So I think it was very difficult to encourage them without some significant leverage that I thought, Ambassador Closard, might be able to render. But, very, very difficult situation. I don't think the government of Afghanistan, Jaroa, fit what the community wanted. And, I think that was the root of what, their challenges were, obviously.
Yes, sir. So even if we were having success tactically, it's kind of doesn't matter if the strategy in the government.
No, I think, as you said, Tom, I was always so grateful for work of you and others, as I was there with you, trying to determine what was best for our unit, for the community we served with and for, frankly. I felt very, very committed to try to figure out, how not to do harm. So how could we, bring things to that community and assist them with, having a discussion. I guess that was what I was hopeful for with establishing security. Security for what? I thought it could, hey, can we have more political discourse? Can we have an opportunity for people in the village to express their desires to a governor that really was a foreigner to them, right? So the local governor was not a person from Zari or, even Kandahar for that matter. So I think, I was grateful for the work we did at so many levels. I think, through that work, did we improve the healthcare for Afghanistan? Absolutely. Did we provide a literacy rate dramatic improvement? Absolutely. Did we open the Afghan people up to external information sources that they never had before? Absolutely. Did child mortality rate go way down? Yes. But that child mortality rate reduction actually created a youth bulge that during my last tour, we had a remarkable amount of teenagers looking for work. And of course, who was willing to pay them, if they didn't have a lot of skills? And, certainly that was, Taliban and others. That causes us a lot of problem.
Yeah, and it got to the point where it became so politically charged even to have any U.S. forces there, both for the Taliban and for the U.S., many who just didn't even want anybody in Afghanistan, that even with that we couldn't even keep that small footprint, even though we have small footprints in over 100 other countries around the world. So it made it difficult when the military objective, it doesn't necessarily align with what makes sense politically. Related to that, sir, I would like to talk about civil-military relations, something we discuss with the students a lot here at the War College. I imagine and I observed that civil-military relations were difficult in 2020 and 2021 for the military leadership. And sir, you were in the middle of it. How do you handle a situation as a military leader when you don't necessarily agree with the political direction? You see a bleak future for the mission, but you have to execute your orders.
Yeah, I think, for all of us, from a military leader, I watched General Miller negotiate this with remarkable acumen. I used to empathize and admire him in the way, like so many commanders before him, tried to negotiate, again, how to do best for his forces, how to do best for his Afghan friends, which many of them were military that he'd fought with. and try to help the government of Afghanistan, and his frustrations with governmental political things that weren't necessarily supporting, maybe the way he desired, but, terrifically, his responsibility was to provide his best military advice. And so I witnessed, a remarkable leader continuing and very skillfully lay out, ways that he thought we could help, which again, I think for what it's worth, what we were offered, genuine, brilliance in a lot of ways, like a lot of our military leaders. But on the other hand, as you're sort of watching this with what I described earlier, not quite sure where the government can take us in this environment. I think I reflect a little bit on what Clausewitz might say. If we even retrace what our goals were when I was with JSOC in 2001, it was very apparent to me after the first couple of days of being with them that, okay, hey, what's next? What's the strategy? What do we hope for? And Clausewitz would say, hey, General, before you start this war, you better be sure to understand the peace you hope to create. And I think I'm a big fan of the old intelligence preparation of the battlefield. I think it was FM 34-130. And what I really was attracted to that was the amount of time they spent on characterizing the battle space, understanding the battlefield effects, so that you understand, the cause and effect of our actions, not only in the military force, your opposition potentially, but the community. And so as I started to, as I said, studying a little bit more about the battlefield effects, and from a Clausewitzian, okay, what do we hope to achieve? I was certainly, like hopefully most of us, questioning, are we taking the right path? And so I think it's a little bit about civil military relations, but I think it's more about ways we take on defense, foreign policy. I'm very attracted to a publication that was commissioned by Bill Gates called the Project on National Security Reform, that outlines some ways structurally, maybe we could be closer together. And this document is very similar to the Goldwater-Nichols Act, which forced the joint players to come together. What Gates advocates in that is that, we should be much, 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 much closer all the time, not just during conflict. Now, that said, I've seen some amazing individual efforts across the team, but I just don't know structurally if we might be able to open up that document that, again, was commissioned by our government, that outlines ways to grow, a closer alignment of defense activities, which I think, would help us all, frankly.
Yes, sir. That makes sense. And even beyond the joint players, brilliant minds involved. And I remember we had such a great team in Western, a very diverse team. And in Kabul in 2020, we had a very diverse team, which brings me to my next question, going even beyond the joint to the interagency. I'd like to hear about your experience with the State Department and U.S. Agency for International Development and USAID. What are your observations about repeatedly working with these agencies and other agencies from the interagency, and what worked, what didn't work, and what can we learn from it?
Yeah, I think, taking in account of what I just described, what I found was usually amazing people there just with a desire to help the people of Afghanistan, embracing things that they brought to the table with the hopes that what they brought to the table would make a positive difference in the outcome of community wellness endeavors, or, future security of, let's say, Kandahar. And so, I was always chief to try to support those folks within limits. Those limits would be to, well, hey, if our campaign plan says, hey, we'd like to give the community a voice on, choosing things that come to their environment, their area, whether it's economics or welfare type affairs, certainly we should try to offer them stuff. So, but though, if there's something that they don't necessarily want or need, do we build the school anyway? For example, do we have an endeavor for or a mandate that women's rights are immediately imposed upon a society that is not ready for it, notwithstanding its legitimate universal rights that we were interested in. My question is imposing things that culturally they can't support yet. How does that work? And I was, I wouldn't say frustrated necessarily, but always intrigued on how best to leverage everybody's capabilities. As you said, a very, very diverse group with us in Zari, Western Kandahar, that, our job was to try to unify their efforts. Matter of fact, to the point, we thought, if you remember, we made our regimental coin. It was about the group. It was called Unified Command Team Zari. We chose the word unified command team very deliberately. It was all the interagency players. It was the government of Jaroa. It was the Afghan National Security Forces, the police, as well as then the people. So our hope was to help bring that community together to have a discussion about how best to serve their community.
Yes, sir.
And I was impressed. Matter of fact, I'm looking at the coin over my shoulder here in the office about that symbol that you guys helped create that involved all those interagency players. So once again, excellent people. But when I get back to discussion we had earlier on unifying our security, our national defense efforts, which I think is, like any business management, just a remarkable challenge that I think we should continue to embrace.
Yes, sir. I remember doing the Fury Shura every month or so. Every time new people would flow in or flow out, we'd bring together a unified team and the Afghans into a room and talk about where we were going. So your point about culture is
Well,
like,
really quick, Tom,
yeah,
I
go ahead,
think
sir.
talk
Yeah,
about where we're going. I almost, if I reflect, it was listening more
it
than
was.
anything.
You're right.
And so the prep
Absolutely.
for those meetings that, only happen 8 times in our,
Hmm.
big meetings. What I was impressed with is how many meetings Guy Jones had down in, by Sangsar, where
Right.
he was listening, where he was trying to understand, where he would ask his interagency partners, hey, just come listen. Let's determine how to, best fit into what they've got going on. And I'm just telling you, through that, a ridiculously dangerous area was made less dangerous because I think, people didn't necessarily see us as the enemy, overtly. Not least of which a remarkable amount of just being present at any place, both the friendly and, people willing to do us harm would see us. So I think and I just wanted to interrupt you, I'm sorry, is
That's all right,
not
sir.
only not telling them what to do, but listening and having a dialogue about what we could do. Certainly I would tell them, frankly, I can remember many times where we'd go into a new area, I'd ask to meet with the community members, and I did this more with One Fury, and we'd go to a new place. We try to liberate Musakala, very Taliban held important spot in Helmand. And, as soon as we get in there, I would ask to, as soon as, Bravo, we clear a space, to give us some with, virtually zero collateral damage. I'll have to tell you how remarkable it was to watch them. I would ask to meet with the locals and then explain to them that I understood they were Taliban, and I thought that was okay. And Haji said, we're not Taliban. We're not Taliban. I'm going to say, hey, bro, it's okay. If you're Taliban, what your political beliefs are, who you're aligned with. But what I'm asking you is not to express yourself violently while we're here, because my guys are very good and it's going to go very badly for you. And Tom, just that practical talk to them and then just listening. I said, hey, while we're here, we want to try to be your friends. I don't know how long we'll be here. I know that's a reach for us to be your friends because I'm here with a lot of people with guns and I came forcibly, but we ask you to have a dialogue with us. And I'm just telling you, almost to the man or person, you can see them nodding their head and accept it. And then, asked to meet day after day just to talk, find out how we were doing so that I would listen to their concerns. I thought was a major step for them, is that we weren't there just to, again, direct what was happening. Notwithstanding, I can't imagine, how I couldn't be imposing upon them when, I arrived with, 800 people with weapons, right? So to me, I just wanted to interrupt you. We were trying to listen as much as anything and understand, how to help.
Yeah, that's great, sir. So back to your point on culture. We say that culture trumps strategy every time. Changing culture takes a long time, and we look at the U.S. wars throughout history where we were successful in a lasting peace, World War II specifically, a lesser degree, Korea, we were there for a long time. Yet it seemed like in Afghanistan, we were always trying to do things quickly, do them overnight. So one thing I know we were trying to do quickly was the drawdown in 2019 to 2020 when I was there. And then when you came in after me, I remember how hard it was from the J2 perspective, trying to remove intel platforms, cut contracts, while trying to ensure we didn't go so deep that we put soldiers at risk. Yet you were dealing with so much more as the ops, as a J3. So, in terms of the sheer logistics of the task of withdrawing an army that had been in Afghanistan for 20 years, during COVID, no less, you're trying to do this. What was your greatest challenge as the operations officer and a division commander during all this managing?
Yeah, and thanks for asking, Tom. Real quick on the first point about our presence, I think yes, but if you look at Germany, we weren't still fighting. We were establishing security, establishing, a way to reestablish, martial. We had something that we weren't fighting an insurgency. Korea, some internal stuff, certainly, skirmishes on the border, but certainly, south of the border, of course, many people could say dealing with a very corrupt government initially. Japan, helping them stand up, who was our enemy, but they, very honorably, acquiesced to that and signed a treaty, and they had leadership to work with us to move ahead. So the Afghanistan, I think, was much different because they were still fighting a civil war. We were still a part of an insurgency, et cetera. As far as my role as the DCOS ops, what I found very important was try to enable what General Miller was doing. With him and Ambassador Kolozad, his orders from the CENTCOM commander, I thought it was very, very important that we get as flexible and agile as possible so that he was not burdened with any large logistical concern, bases, for example, contractors, equipment, ammunition, other commodities that were invested in Kandahar Airfield, for example, and then, do the right thing with working with State Department. We put in a lot of time to determine how best to hand over equipment that would be hopefully handled responsibly, hand over airfields. I mean, believe it or not, the energy we put into trying to hand over the running of Kandahar Airfield was a major undertaking that was done increasingly by a very small number of people because we had a force reduction as well. So in addition to the COVID and everything else, we had a number of troops we had to get down to. So a staff in DCOS ops that was well over hundreds a year and a half before I got there was in the low teens. And so, people like Mike Inglis, who was a field artillery person that we brought forward for 10th Mountain to be all of a sudden the theater G3. I mean, holy cow, this guy, performed like so many others, and our coalition brothers and sisters helping us in the same manner, where we used to have a stable of, I was left with Todd Ashurst, one, Aussie general, and a couple other folks who did remarkable work and just took on so much more. So I think the benefit was, trying to team build, do old fashioned process management stuff and really, really get into the weeds everywhere we could in order to understand exactly what needed to be done and get on with making that theater as light as possible. So General Miller and the team had as much options as possible. And oh, by the way, I knew that would be best for our troops. So if we were agile and not fixed at a location because just logistics was holding us up, I know, if we had to leave in a hurry, if that was the case, we could do so. And so allowed them to think more about tactics than, logistics on sort of game day when they needed to.
Yeah, not an easy task at all. Sir, changing subjects a little bit, one of the things I have always admired about you is your commitment to professional development, specifically reading. I remember when I was in the brigade, 4th Brigade, and we were deploying, you made us all read Sarah Chai's A Punishment of Virtue. And we were so busy. We're working 16, 18 hours a day preparing to deploy, but we all did it. And
I apologize for that, Tom.
No, it was great, sir. And we talked about it, and I think it benefited us when we went in there, understanding the culture a little bit better. Just stepping back from that, though, can you just describe to me your philosophy towards personal professional development, and what would your advice be to colonels coming out of the War College about how to professionally develop yourself and your team?
Yeah, and Tom, I think one, I appreciate your discussion about your individual journey. I mean, here's a pro that was trying to train intel teams, trying to develop training scenarios for us upon deployment. Love and care for your families because you're a great family man and a wonderful husband. As I watch you and admire what you are as a father as well, and eager to continue to learn, to put in that time to read those books before you go to bed, when you could be, getting 7 hours sleep. I know a person like you is getting 5. For us, I think as leaders, asking people to read something, to invest that time, choosing the right thing is really, really important. So we didn't choose Clausewitz. Now, did we have a big discussion about coin? Yes. If you recall, we gave the short primers where they could have a quick read, and we had a dialogue with leaders, which I thought was very, very important about really going to the why and the hows to a campaign plan as we take a look at ends, ways, and means. But Sarah Chase's example, she has a wonderful example of a person that she, I think, fell in love with, frankly, is a man called Akram, that she actually saw as a virtuous Afghan. She was there, I think, a soap business or something in the community of Kandahar. And Akram was a hero. He was actually a person of virtue. But what the moral of the story is, the Afghan environment punishes virtue. You can't be virtuous. And so thus, where you see is all the people that have to have power. They can't be self-actualized like we have to give of each other freely. There's just too much against them. And so, I use that as an example of something that we read together that helped us understand the intelligence preparation, the battlefield. Where are you going? What is the environment you're going to work in? So for us military professionals, choosing things for people to read, I think start with what's going to make them really, really good at their job. And, for us, whether that's, how to plan, how to run training management stuff, et cetera, I think it's important that you provide them a list of things to read, and then go up the chain of, I guess, hierarchy of, hey, let's start with the basics and move forward to, sort of big things. Now, there's a lot of wisdom to start with the why, why be a military professional, and things like that. But, I try to start with, reading things that really matter to the success of the unit. And the last topic on that, so Sarah Chase, if you can remember, the police chief of Kandahar is in my office, and he starts talking about his old buddy, a guy named Akram. I said, Akram? I said, that can't be. So I go, Sarah's book is on my shelf. I open up the page, and if you remember, that guy gets in tears talking about, because he was a friend of Akram. Akram got assassinated in Kabul. And from that day forward, he and I were like peas and carrots, right? So here's an example of a person I'd never met. Like the day I met him, I have familiarity with him. And like from that day forward, as you might recall, someone that previous commanders had trouble warming up to, just because he was a difficult man. When he and I had that bond about a shared person, that he would tell me all the time stories about him, it was amazing. And I use that as another awesome story about just something I stumbled onto with a great book by Sarah.
All right, thanks, sir. So reaching back across your 6 tours in Afghanistan, many of those tours leading large formations of troops, as a military leader, what was the hardest thing you had to do, and what do you take away from that experience?
Yeah, the hardest thing I had to do is many of our military leaders either listening here or I served with or admire and appreciate. I think it was trying to assess, how much risk to ask our soldiers to take on our behalf or on the mission's behalf. I still, recognize my responsibility for asking people to do things that cost them limbs, that cost them their lives. I look at a man like Travis Mills, who, thank goodness, he is flourishing now as a person, but he lost all 4 of his limbs in Western Kandahar. I look at Corey Rensburg, who I fought with in Kandahar with the 1st Ranger Battalion, who suffered and is thriving, but nonetheless, was doing things on my behalf, on the unit's behalf, and was permanently injured. So I think it was the hardest thing is just trying to, rationalize and sort out what to do, knowing that we were putting men and women at incredible risk that cost many of them their lives, and many more of them, life-changing injury. And so I think that was by far the hardest thing. And as I suggested, watching, our strategy, to what end were we going to achieve by that patrol Travis Mills was on that day, right? What were we going to achieve by the mission that Corey Rensburg was on that night? Now, I do believe both of those men did good those days, that we dealt with people that were generally evil, absolutely. So in a very purist standpoint, I think both of them, were doing great things in that night. I think the campaign their units were on were just. We were trying to extend thoughts of liberty to people, offer them opportunities to express their desires to a government that we think would be democratic. So in the purest sense, I'd like to think that, those men and women that we lost and got hurt, that their contribution was not in vain. But I will say that certainly that by far was the biggest challenge. It's just sort of pragmatically, were the efforts of my soldiers, our soldiers, going to be worth the cost of them being seriously hurt or killed? And that to me was every day, every minute, trying to do that. And so many leaders having to go through that. It's just a terrifically awesome responsibility that we have, that they have, our leaders have, that even the junior NCOs that would accept my orders to put people out on the street or in the helicopter. I'm incredibly impressed with how people dealt with that, handled it, and did so very, very, very well. So by far, that was the hardest thing, that I had to experience.
So is there any message you want to send out to all the soldiers who served under you in Afghanistan?
Well, I think it's, as I just expressed, I mean, my gratitude for the loyalty, commitment, shared Army values, and trust that you have in us. I'm just grateful to have been in your company, to walk with you. I tell people all the time, hey, if I was to retire tomorrow, I've walked with giants. I've stood on shoulders of great men and women. I've watched amazing things happen in front of my eyes, whether that was, caring for a child in a firefight, or just giving, an Afghan person, care right after they were fighting us, or, reaching out and extending themselves for others. It was, to me, again, humbling. And I say thanks. I say thanks for what they do, because I think it is a part, particularly as you even watch Russians today, uniquely, well, not, I wouldn't say uniquely, because I'm sure a lot of other countries have this, but it's certainly a quality that American people have that, is to me so impressive. So I just say thanks, Tom. And I also thanks to my Afghan partners who I tried desperately to assist, that they were struggling as well as ANDSF, the Afghan National Defense Forces, as they were leading their men and women, how were they going to comport themselves? How did they have to answer to people? So they have my empathy and admiration in a lot of ways also.
Well, thank you, sir. And I'm afraid we are out of time. So sadly, we have to bring this conversation to an end. But General Mennes, thank you so much for talking to us here at A Better Peace about your experiences in Afghanistan. And it was really great to have you. And thank you to all those who are listening to this conversation. Please send us your comments and thoughts, suggestions for future conversations. We're always excited to hear from our listeners. And until next time, this is Tom Spahr. Thanks for listening to A Better Peace, the War Room Podcast.
And that concludes our program. Thank you for listening. The views expressed in this podcast reflect those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views, policies, or positions of the U.S. Army or the Department of Defense. Let us know what you think. Provide us your feedback, comments, or suggestions through our webpage at warroom.armywarcollege.edu. And have a great day.